He used to tell me I was disposable, that at work nobody was irreplaceable, least of all me. And for a long time, while the neon lights of Seoul flickered through the windows of the 15th floor, while my fingers typed reports that never bore my name, while my reflection in the dark glass seemed increasingly faded, I believed him. I believed because he knew exactly where to press. He knew I needed that job. He knew I was afraid of disappointing my family. He knew that every time he smiled and said, "You're essential to me," a part of me still wanted to believe it was true. He knew each of my weaknesses like someone memorizing a map, and he used it against me whenever he needed to keep me small, whenever he needed me not to question, not to see the game he was playing. And I, naive, exhausted, desperate for a bit of recognition, let him convince me that I was nothing without him. I let him shape my perception of myself until I couldn't remember who I had been before I started working there, before I started believing his lies, before I started accepting that maybe, just maybe, I really wasn't good enough. Every morning, I would wake up at 5:30, my alarm cutting through dreams that had become increasingly anxious, increasingly filled with spreadsheets and deadlines, and his disapproving face. I would lie there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, feeling the weight of the day before it had even begun. The apartment was in Gangnam, in one of those older buildings squeezed between the gleaming new towers, a reminder of what Seoul used to be before it became this city of glass and steel and ambition. My room was small enough that I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner, and there was a persistent dampness that no amount of dehumidifying could quite eliminate. But it was mine, and it was all I could afford on my salary, especially after sending money home to my parents every month. I would shower quickly, the water never quite hot enough, and dress in one of my 5 work outfits that I rotated throughout the week. Black pants, white blouse, simple cardigan, black pants, blue blouse, blazer, the same uniform variations, as if by dressing the part I could somehow become the successful professional I was pretending to be. I would apply my makeup carefully, covering the dark circles that had become permanent fixtures under my eyes, adding a touch of lipstick that I hoped made me look more confident than I felt. Then I would grab my bag, check one more time that I had my laptop and all the files I needed, and head out into the Seoul morning. Before I continue, I need to tell you something. If you've ever felt this, that tightness in your chest when someone makes you doubt your own worth, when you work twice as hard just to prove you deserve to be there, when you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person you've become trying to please people who never truly valued you, then this video is for you. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, because I want more people to know they're not alone in this feeling of being invisible in a place where you give your all. I want you to know that your story matters, that your pain is real, and that there is a way out. And stay with me until the end, because this story, it's going to show you that being underestimated can be the beginning of your greatest victory. That being called disposable can be the awakening you needed to understand that, in reality, you were always irreplaceable. You were just in the wrong place, surrounded by the wrong people. And sometimes, it takes being broken to realize just how strong you actually are. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to understand what you're truly capable of. Sometimes, the moment when you feel most powerless is actually the moment before you discover your greatest power. I worked at a technology company in the heart of Seoul, on the 15th floor of a glass skyscraper, where the reflection of the city seemed more real than the life inside it. The building was one of those architectural marvels that tourists photographed, all sleek lines and reflective surfaces that caught the light at sunset and made the whole structure glow like it was on fire. But inside, it was cold. The walls were white, sterile, with that corporate gray tone that sucks any color from the soul. The air always had that smell of stale coffee mixed with freezing air conditioning, and the sound of keyboards was like a mechanical symphony, rhythmic, suffocating, that never stopped, not even when the sun set and the city began to light up its lights. I would arrive at 7 in the morning, when there was still fog on the windows, and the sky was tinged with that pale purple that precedes dawn. The security guard at the entrance knew me by name, always greeting me with a sympathetic smile that somehow made me feel even lonelier. His name was Mr. Park, and he was in his 60s, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He saw me arrive before everyone and leave after everyone, day after day, week after week, month after month. Sometimes he would offer me candy from the bowl he kept at his desk, and I would take one gratefully, touched by this small gesture of human kindness in a place that often felt devoid of it. I wonder if he ever questioned why I was always there, why I never seemed to have a life outside those walls. Did he see the exhaustion in my face? Did he notice how my shoulders became more hunched as the months went by? Did he wonder what kept me there, working myself to death for people who didn't appreciate me? I would leave after 10 at night, when the city lights were already on, and my reflection in the glass was just a tired shadow, hunched over. With dark circles I tried to hide with concealer, but everyone saw anyway. By that time, Mr. Park would have been replaced by the night guard, a younger man who never smiled and never made small talk. He would barely look up as I walked past, just buzzed me through the door with a bored expression. The contrast between the two guards somehow seemed symbolic of my day, starting with a glimmer of human warmth and ending in cold indifference. It was a routine that swallowed me little by little, day after day, until I no longer knew who I was outside that office, outside that desk, outside that chair, where I spent more than 12 hours a day. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always said no. At first they would call and text, trying to tempt me with dinners and movies and weekend trips. "Come on, you need a break," they would say. "Just this once, skip work and come have fun with us." But I couldn't. I always had a deadline, always had a report to finish, always had something urgent that Jaehyun needed. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. My social media feeds were full of photos of my friends at restaurants and clubs and beaches, living the lives that young people in Seoul were supposed to live, while I was trapped in that office, existing only within those four walls. My family stopped asking how work was going, because they knew I would just say fine, even when it clearly wasn't. My mother, bless her heart, would call every evening when I was still at the office. I could hear the concern in her voice, the unasked questions lingering behind her cheerful updates about life in our hometown. "Your father's back is bothering him again," she would say. "The garden is doing well. The tomatoes are huge this year. Your cousin is getting married in the spring." Normal life, continuing without me, while I slowly disappeared into this corporate machine that ground people down into nothing. I had become a ghost of myself, existing only within those four walls, living only for the approval of a man who would never give it to me genuinely. The office itself was designed in that modern minimalist style that was supposed to inspire creativity and collaboration, but instead just felt sterile and unwelcoming. Everything was white or gray or glass. The desks were arranged in an open plan, which meant there was no privacy, no escape from the constant surveillance of management and the competitive glances of colleagues. The fluorescent lights were bright and unforgiving, giving everyone a slightly sickly appearance. There were motivational posters on the walls with phrases in English like, "Innovation is our passion," and "Success through synergy," corporate propaganda that nobody actually believed, but everyone pretended to embrace. In one corner, there was a break room with a coffee machine that was always breaking down, and a refrigerator that smelled faintly of spoiled food. This was where people gathered to gossip in hushed tones, forming temporary alliances and sharing complaints that they would never dare voice in official channels. I made reports that nobody read carefully. I adjusted spreadsheets that others presented as their own in meetings, receiving praise and bonuses while I sat there in the corner, invisible. I fixed mistakes that weren't mine, but that somehow always came back to me when something went wrong, as if I were some kind of repository for other people's guilt. And all of this was to please one person, the manager, the man who smiled broadly in meetings and called me his right hand in front of others, but who, in private, in empty hallways or in late-night messages, reminded me that I was lucky to be there, that there were hundreds of people willing to do my job for less, that I should be grateful for the opportunity, as if gratitude were synonymous with accepting abuse, as if luck were the same as exploitation, as if being chosen to be used was some kind of privilege I should cherish. His name was Jae-hyun, early 40s, always impeccable suit, hair combed back with too much gel, the kind of man who enters a room and expects everyone to stop talking. He wore expensive watches and Italian shoes, and cologne that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His office was in the corner, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of Seoul, a view he probably never even looked at because he was too busy climbing the corporate ladder. And for a long time, I stopped. I stopped talking, questioning, existing, just so he could feel bigger, because I had learned over the years that women who talk too much, question too much, assert themselves too much, are seen as problematic, difficult, unpleasant. There was this incident early in my employment that taught me to stay quiet. I had been working there for about 6 months when I noticed an error in a major client proposal. It was a significant mistake. We had underestimated the project timeline by almost 40%, which would have led to either massive losses for the company or a very angry client when we inevitably missed deadlines. I brought it up in a meeting, explaining the calculation error and suggesting we revise the proposal before submitting it. Jae-hyun had smiled at me, that tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Thank you for your input, but I think you're overthinking this. We have more experience with these estimates." The proposal went through as originally written. 3 months later, we were indeed massively behind schedule. The client was threatening legal action, and suddenly everyone was looking for someone to blame. Did Jae-hyun acknowledge that I had warned about this? Did he take responsibility for ignoring my concerns? Of course not. Instead, he told upper management that I had been part of the team that created the original estimate, conveniently forgetting that I had objected. That was when I learned that speaking up, being right, challenging the status quo, none of that mattered if you didn't have power. So I swallowed my words. I swallowed the anger. I swallowed the injustice. And every time I swallowed, a part of me died a little. But I thought that was what I had to do to survive in that environment. I thought that was how you earned respect. But the truth is, I never earned respect. I only earned contempt disguised as protection. Jae-hyun had a way of speaking that seemed kind, but carried a subtle poison. He never yelled, never openly insulted, but every word that came out of his mouth was carefully chosen to make me insecure, to make me doubt myself. "Are you sure that's right?" he would ask, tilting his head with feigned concern. When I presented him with data I had triple-checked. "Don't you think you're overreacting?" When I expressed worry about a deadline that was clearly unrealistic. "I only want what's best for you. That's why I'm correcting you," he would say, while undermining every decision I made, every suggestion I offered, every contribution I tried to make. And I, like a fool, believed him. I believed he was helping me grow, when in reality he was keeping me on the ground, trampling my confidence every time I tried to stand up. He knew I was good at what I did. He knew I was efficient, dedicated, careful, and precisely because of that, he kept me close. Not because he valued me, but because I was useful. I was the perfect tool, the piece that made everything work, but that nobody noticed, until something broke. And then, suddenly, I was the only one to blame. There was a whole language of control that he employed, subtle mechanisms of manipulation that I didn't even recognize at the time. He would praise me in vague terms, good work, or nice job, but never with specifics, never with concrete recognition that I could point to later. He would give me assignments with unclear parameters, then criticize me for not reading his mind about what he actually wanted. He would ask for my opinion in private, then present those same ideas as his own in meetings, never acknowledging their source. He would schedule important discussions at times he knew were inconvenient for me, late evenings when I was exhausted, early mornings when I hadn't had time to prepare, ensuring I was always off balance, always at a disadvantage. I remember one particular evening, about 6 months before everything fell apart. It was late, past 9, and the office was almost empty. The cleaning staff had already come through, leaving that faint smell of disinfectant mixed with the ever-present coffee. Their cart rattled as they moved between floors, and I could hear them talking quietly in the hallway, their voices a reminder that there was life outside this bubble of work, ordinary people doing honest jobs, and then going home to their families. I was finishing a presentation that Jae-hyun was supposed to deliver to the board the next morning. He had given me the assignment at 4 that afternoon, knowing full well it would take hours to complete. The presentation was for a major client, potentially worth millions to the company, and it required pulling data from multiple sources, creating compelling visualizations, and crafting a narrative that would convince the board to approve a significant investment. It was the kind of task that should have taken a week, not 5 hours. As I worked, my fingers flying over the keyboard, my eyes straining in the dim light, I had turned off the overhead fluorescents because they were giving me a headache, working instead by the glow of my monitor and a small desk lamp. He walked past my desk. He stopped, looked at my screen, and said, "Make sure you don't mess this up. This presentation is important for my career, not our career, not the company's success, his career." And then he left, went home to his family, to his comfortable apartment in Gangnam, to his wife and children who probably had no idea how he treated the people who worked for him. He went home to eat dinner and watch television and sleep in a comfortable bed, while I stayed there, sacrificing my time, my health, my sanity, for his advancement. I finally left the building at 11:30, my back aching from hours of hunching over the computer, my eyes burning and dry from staring at the screen. The presentation was perfect. I had made sure of that. Every slide was polished, every data point was accurate, every argument was compelling. The next day, Jae-hyun delivered it without changing a single word, received enthusiastic applause from the board, and was congratulated by the CEO. He never mentioned my name, never acknowledged the late night I had put in, never even said thank you. That night, as I finally left the building at 11:30, I looked up at the Seoul sky, barely visible through the light pollution and the haze of exhaustion clouding my vision, and wondered when I had become this person. When had I decided that my worth was determined by how much I could endure? When had I accepted that being overworked and underappreciated was just the price of employment? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had happened gradually, like falling asleep. You don't notice it happening until you're already unconscious. Or like being slowly poisoned, each small dose imperceptible until one day you wake up and realize you're dying. The subway ride home was long and lonely. At that hour, the trains were mostly empty except for a few other exhausted workers and groups of young people coming back from nights out, laughing and singing, drunk and carefree. I envied them. I envied their youth, their freedom, their ability to enjoy life instead of being crushed by it. I sat in a seat near the door, my laptop bag heavy on my lap, and watched the stations fly past. The fluorescent lights of the train made everyone look slightly ill, highlighting the exhaustion on faces, the slump in shoulders. We were all so tired, all so worn down by the demands of this city, this economy, this system that consumed people and spat them out. When I got home, I was too wound up to sleep despite my exhaustion. I would lie in bed, my mind racing with thoughts of everything I needed to do the next day, everything that could go wrong, everything I had probably forgotten. Sometimes I would cry, quietly, trying not to let my neighbors hear through the thin walls. Sometimes I would just stare at the ceiling, watching the occasional car headlights sweep across the room, feeling utterly alone despite being surrounded by millions of people in this massive city. But on that cold Friday in November, everything began to crumble. It was one of those days when Seoul's icy wind cuts through your skin and makes you feel like the entire city is conspiring against your peace. The sky was gray, heavy, loaded with dark clouds threatening to burst at any moment. The fine rain tapped on the windows like impatient fingers, creating a melancholic rhythm that seemed synchronized with my tight chest. The weather matched the mood in the office, tense, oppressive, like something bad was brewing just beneath the surface. I was finishing a report, my eyes burning with fatigue, when my phone vibrated on the desk. The bluish light from the screen illuminated my tired face, and I felt a shiver run down my spine even before reading the message. It was from him. "We need to talk. Meeting room. Now." Just those words. No context, no explanation. But I knew. Somehow I knew this was bad. My stomach clenched. That kind of message never came followed by good news. I had learned to read the subtext in his communications. When he wrote now instead of "when you have a moment," it meant trouble. When he didn't include any context, it meant he wanted me to walk into that room already anxious, already defensive, already weakened. I closed the laptop slowly, as if each movement could postpone the inevitable, stood up with shaky legs and walked to the room. The hallway seemed longer than normal, stretching out before me like in a nightmare where you're running but never moving forward. My footsteps echoed on the light marble floor, each click of my heels like a countdown to my doom. And I could feel the glances of colleagues, some disguised, others too curious, as if everyone already knew something I didn't know yet, as if I were the last to know my own fate, as if they had all been waiting for this moment, this inevitable fall that they had seen coming but had done nothing to prevent. Were they glad? Did seeing someone else fail make them feel more secure in their own positions? Or did they feel sympathy, recognizing that this could happen to any of them? That we were all vulnerable in this corporate ecosystem where management could destroy your career with a single meeting? I couldn't tell. Faces were carefully neutral, but I caught whispers that stopped as I passed, sidelong glances that looked away when I tried to meet them. When I opened the door, Jae-hyun was sitting at the head of the table, with his arms crossed, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That smile I already knew so well. The smile of someone who had already decided everything even before you entered the room. The smile of a predator about to strike. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't worried. He was calm, comfortable, like someone about to execute a plan he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. And I, innocent fool that I was, still thought maybe it was about a promotion, about a new project, about something good. How naive I was. How much I still wanted to believe he had some kindness inside him. Even after all the signs, all the red flags, all the moments when he had shown me exactly who he was, I still wanted to believe in the fantasy version of him that I had created in my head. The mentor, the protector, the person who saw my potential and wanted to help me grow. I wanted to believe that all the late nights and sacrificed weekends and swallowed pride had meant something, that he had noticed my dedication and was finally going to reward it, even as my stomach churned with anxiety, even as every instinct screamed at me to be careful. A small, desperate part of me hoped for good news. "Sit down," he said, without taking his eyes off the laptop screen. Even this was a power move, making me wait, refusing to give me his full attention, establishing from the first moment that I was not important enough to warrant his immediate focus. I sat. The leather chair was cold, the kind of expensive ergonomic chair that was supposed to be comfortable, but somehow wasn't. My hands were trembling slightly, so I placed them on the table, trying to appear calm, trying to appear professional, trying to hide the fear that was already consuming me inside. But inside, my heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. I could feel the accelerated pulse in my neck, in my temple, in my wrists. It was as if my whole body was screaming, "Run!" But I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in that moment, waiting for the blow I knew was coming, but couldn't see clearly yet. The room was one of the smaller meeting rooms, with space for maybe 6 people around the table. The walls were glass on 2 sides, supposedly to encourage transparency and collaboration, but I had always found them oppressive. Anyone walking past could look in, could witness whatever was happening. One wall had a whiteboard covered in faded marker from previous meetings that hadn't been properly erased. The other had a flat-screen monitor for presentations, currently dark. The table was that fake wood laminate trying to look expensive but just looking cheap. There was a cup of cold coffee from someone's earlier meeting, a ring of condensation spreading on the table. "A serious problem has occurred," he began, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, empty of any empathy. They were like a shark's eyes, dead, black, focused only on the kill. The company's main project had a major failure. Data was compromised. The client is furious, and unfortunately, he paused, tilting his head as if he were sad, as if this hurt him too. But I could see through the mask. I could see the theater. I could see the calculation behind every movement, every word, every pause. The responsibility was yours. For a second, the world stopped. The sound of rain on the window disappeared. The noise of keyboards outside vanished. The hum of the air conditioning cut out. Only that ringing in my ears remained, that emptiness in my stomach, that sensation of falling into an endless hole. I blinked, trying to process what he had just said. Responsibility was mine? How could that be? I had followed every protocol, every guideline, every instruction he had given me. I had double-checked everything, triple-checked even, because I knew how important this project was. I knew the client was demanding. I knew there was no room for error. "What do you mean?" My voice came out weaker than I would have liked, almost a whisper, barely audible even in the quiet room. "You were in charge of that part of the project. The files were under your supervision, and now we have a client threatening to break the contract." He opened a folder, a physical folder, which struck me as odd in our mostly digital office. But I realized now it was part of the theater, the formal presentation of evidence, and slid some papers in my direction, with theatrical calmness, as if presenting evidence in a courtroom. "Here, it's all documented." I picked up the papers with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the lines, the dates, the names, my name, my login, my approvals, documents showing that I had supposedly authorized changes that I knew I hadn't authorized, timestamps indicating I had been working on files at hours when I knew I had been elsewhere. But there it was, in black and white, my name attached to every failure, every mistake, every compromise that had led to this disaster. The papers felt heavy in my hands, as if they carried physical weight, as if they were made of lead instead of paper. But I didn't remember doing that. I didn't remember because I hadn't done it. I was absolutely certain I hadn't done it. The documents showed approvals dated from times when I knew I had been in other meetings, changes made under my credentials at hours when I had already left the office. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But there it was, in black and white, my name attached to every failure, every mistake, every compromise that had led to this disaster. "This doesn't make sense," I said, raising my eyes to face him, trying to keep my voice steady, but it trembled despite my best efforts. "I never approved this data. You changed the deadlines last week, remember? I sent you an email warning that if we rushed the implementation without proper testing, we could compromise the integrity of the entire system. I documented my concerns. I explicitly said this would lead to problems. I don't care what you think you did or didn't do," he cut in, with a dry, impatient tone, as if I were a stubborn child refusing to accept reality, as if my protests were mere whining that he had to endure. "What matters is that the mistake was yours, and the company needs someone to take responsibility for this." I felt the air disappear from my lungs. It was like being underwater, trying to scream but unable to make a sound, watching the surface get further and further away as you sink. It was as if the walls of the room were closing around me, crushing me, suffocating me. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, hurting my eyes, making my head pound with a sharp pain behind my temples. "You're going to blame me?" I asked, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice, the anger and fear mixing together. "I did everything right. I followed every instruction of yours. Every change you asked for, I made. I documented everything. I warned you about the risks. I sent you reports showing the potential problems with the timeline. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and looked at me with that coldness I'll never forget. That look that clearly said, "You don't matter. You never mattered. You were always just a tool, a means to an end. And now that you're no longer useful, you're being discarded like broken equipment. You're just an employee, dear. I'm the one who decides what happens here. And what's going to happen is this. You're going to be demoted. You're going to be taken off the project. And you're going to accept this in silence. Because if you try to make noise," he smiled, but it was an empty, threatening smile that made me feel a chill down my spine, made me feel like I was looking at a monster wearing a human face. "Nobody will believe you. Do you think anyone here will take your side? Do you think anyone will risk their own job to defend you? Be realistic. You're disposable. Everyone is. But especially you. You should be grateful we're not terminating you entirely. Consider this demotion a kindness." In that instant, I understood with perfect, terrible clarity. I wasn't his right hand. I was the shield, the scapegoat he kept around for when he needed someone to throw the blame on. And that day had arrived. He was about to be promoted. I had heard the rumors circulating through the office for weeks. He wanted that director position, had been angling for it for months, networking with executives, taking credit for successful projects, positioning himself as leadership material. And for that, he needed to prove he was efficient, that he solved problems, that he made difficult decisions even when they were unpleasant. And the difficult decision this time was to sacrifice me, to throw me under the bus so he could climb over my broken body to reach his next career milestone. I was the price of his ambition. I left that room with shaky legs and burning eyes. The world seemed tilted, off balance, as if gravity had shifted and I might fall at any moment. I didn't cry, not in front of him. I refused to give him that satisfaction, refused to let him see me broken. But when I got to the women's bathroom, I locked the stall door and let the tears fall. They were hot, silent, loaded with rage and humiliation, and a grief so profound it felt like mourning. I bit my fist to not make noise, so nobody would hear me, so nobody would know I was broken. I could taste blood where my teeth broke the skin, but I didn't care. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation I was feeling. I asked myself, between muffled sobs, how did I let it get to this point? How did I not see he was using me all this time? How was I so blind, so naive, so stupid? How many signs had I ignored? How many warning signals had I rationalized away? When had I stopped trusting my own instincts and started believing his version of reality instead? Because that's what people like him do. They make you believe you're important, that you're valued, until the moment they need a scapegoat. And then, suddenly, you become nothing. You become disposable. You become the problem that needs to be eliminated. And the worst part of it all is that they do it with such naturalness, with such coldness, with such practiced ease, that you start to doubt yourself. You start to think that maybe, just maybe, the fault really is yours, that maybe you're not good enough, that maybe you deserve this, that maybe all those hours you worked, all those sacrifices you made, all those times you put the company before your own well-being, maybe none of it mattered because you were fundamentally flawed, fundamentally inadequate, fundamentally disposable. After I composed myself, I washed my face with cold water, trying to reduce the redness around my eyes. The bathroom mirror was unforgiving, showing me a woman I barely recognized. Pale, defeated, small. The harsh lighting made me look sick. I reapplied some makeup with shaking hands, trying to make myself presentable enough to walk back to my desk, without everyone immediately knowing I had been crying. But I knew they would know anyway. Bad news travels fast in an office, and I had no doubt that word of my demotion was already spreading through the floor like wildfire. In the following days, I was demoted. The change was swift and brutal. They took me off the main project, removed my access to key files and systems. My name disappeared from the distribution lists for strategy meetings. Someone even removed me from the team's WhatsApp group without explanation. I only noticed when I tried to send a message and realized I was no longer a member. I became a shadow in the very place where I was once indispensable. Or at least, that's what I thought. My new desk was in a dark corner of the office, away from the windows, away from natural light, away from everything and everyone that mattered. It was like being sent to corporate purgatory, still technically employed, still technically part of the company, but effectively erased, invisible, non-existent. The desk was smaller, older, with a wobble that made it shake every time I typed. Someone had scratched graffiti into the surface years ago, careless marks that had never been repaired. The chair was uncomfortable, the kind that squeaked with every movement and offered no lumbar support. My back began to ache constantly. Even my computer was older, slower, taking forever to boot up and frequently freezing, as if the universe was conspiring to make every aspect of my work life reflect my new diminished status. It was as if they wanted me to disappear gradually, to dissolve into insignificance, until nobody remembered my name anymore, until I simply gave up and quit on my own, saving them the trouble of firing me. Colleagues looked at me sideways, some with pity, that kind of pity that hurts more than any insult, that makes you feel like a wounded animal that should be put out of its misery. They would see me and quickly look away, as if my failure was contagious, as if by acknowledging me they might somehow be associated with my disgrace, might catch whatever disease had caused my downfall. Others looked with relief. After all, it hadn't happened to them. I could see it in their eyes, in the subtle relaxation of their shoulders as they passed me. Better her than me. They walked a little taller, worked a little more visibly, stayed a little later, as if to signal to management that they were nothing like me, that they were loyal, that they were productive, that they were safe to keep around. I had become a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when you fail to meet expectations, when you somehow displease the powers that be. And some, the worst ones, looked at me with contempt, as if I had done something terribly wrong, as if I deserved every bit of my punishment. These were often the people who had once asked me for help, who had relied on my expertise, who had benefited from my late nights and early mornings. But now that I was marked as a failure, they treated me like I was toxic, like I was beneath them, like I was a stain on the company that needed to be removed. One woman who I had trained when she first joined the company, who I had mentored and supported and helped to succeed, actually moved her desk further away from mine. She didn't say why, didn't acknowledge it, just quietly requested a transfer to another section of the floor. The message was clear. Association with me was career suicide. And Jae-hyun? He continued life as if nothing had happened. He laughed loudly in meetings, patted others on the shoulder, made jokes, prepared for the promotion he so dreamed of. He saw me in the hallway and didn't even look away, didn't even acknowledge my existence. I was invisible to him now. A problem solved. A chapter closed. I was nothing. Sometimes I would see him in the elevator, and he would be talking on his phone, discussing dinner plans or weekend trips, living his life without a single sign of guilt or remorse. How could someone do that? How could someone destroy another person's career, their reputation, their sense of self-worth, and then just carry on as if nothing had happened? How could he sleep at night? How could he look at himself in the mirror? I realized then, with a clarity that was almost painful, that to him, I really was disposable. I was never a person in his eyes, just a resource to be used and discarded when convenient, like a broken tool or an outdated piece of equipment. He probably didn't even think about me anymore. I was solved, finished, no longer relevant to his life or his ambitions, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. Something inside me, some core of resistance that I didn't even know I possessed, refused to accept this fate. At night, when I returned to my small apartment in Gangnam, I would sit in front of the computer, reviewing everything, every email, every file, every conversation, every document. My apartment was too quiet, just the sound of rain hitting the window and the blue glow of the screen illuminating my tired face in the darkness. The apartment felt even smaller now, the walls pressing in on me. It was tiny, a one-room efficiency with barely enough space for a bed, a tiny kitchen area with a 2-burner stove and a mini-fridge, and a desk where I worked late into the night. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' conversations, their television shows, the sound of them cooking dinner and laughing with their families, their lives continuing normally while mine was falling apart. The contrast was unbearable sometimes. I couldn't sleep. My insomnia, which had always been bad, became worse. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened, replaying the meeting with Jae-hyun over and over, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the ways I should have defended myself. I couldn't eat properly. Food tasted like nothing, like cardboard and ash. I lost weight, my clothes hanging looser on my frame. Every time I tried to rest, my mind would race with anxiety, with anger, with fear about the future. My mother called every day, worried, her voice tight with concern that she tried to hide. She would ask if I was okay, and I lied. I said everything was great, that work was going well, that I was happy, that I was thriving, because I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say that I had failed, that I had been humiliated, that I had been discarded like trash. I couldn't disappoint her too. She had been so proud when I got this job, had told all her friends and relatives about her daughter working for a prestigious tech company in Seoul, had bragged about my success to anyone who would listen. How could I tell her that her daughter was now sitting in a dark corner, labeled as incompetent, blamed for a failure that wasn't hers? How could I admit that everything she had been proud of was built on sand, that it had all collapsed? I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes, to hear the worry in her voice intensify, to know that I had let her down. So I lied. I put on a cheerful voice and told her about fictional project successes and imaginary compliments from colleagues. Each lie felt like swallowing glass, painful and damaging, but I couldn't stop. But inside me, a flame was beginning to grow. Not sadness anymore, not shame anymore. It was anger, a cold, lucid anger that made me see everything clearly for the first time, like someone turning on all the lights in a dark house. I knew something was wrong. I knew because I had been careful, meticulous. I always was. It was one of the things I prided myself on, my attention to detail, my thoroughness, my unwillingness to cut corners or take shortcuts. So I started looking, line by line, folder by folder, backup after backup. I searched every corner of that system like an obsessed detective, like someone possessed. I spent hours and hours until dawn, with red, burning eyes, surviving on instant coffee and determination. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because I knew. I knew he had done something. I knew I wasn't guilty, and I needed to prove it, not just to the company, but to myself. I needed to know that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right all along, that I hadn't failed in the way they said I had. The company's digital filing system was complex, with multiple layers of access and security, but I still had my credentials. They hadn't revoked all of my access yet, probably an oversight in their haste to demote me. And I knew the system intimately. I had, after all, been the one to organize and maintain much of it during my years there. I knew where the backups were stored, how the version control worked, where to find the logs that tracked every change and every access. I started with my own files, checking timestamps, comparing versions, looking for any discrepancies. At first, everything seemed normal. The documents appeared exactly as they should, but then I noticed something odd. There were files that showed I had made changes at times when I knew I hadn't been at my computer. Changes made at 2 a.m. when I had been home, asleep in my bed. Approvals granted on a Sunday when I had been visiting my parents in Busan, when I hadn't even had my laptop with me. My heart started beating faster. This was something. This was evidence. I dug deeper, pulling up the access logs, cross-referencing them with my own calendar and records. And that's when I found it. It was almost 3 in the morning. My eyes were burning with exhaustion, and the screen was beginning to blur when I saw it clearly for the first time. An altered report. A number modified, but the modification wasn't logged under my account. It was logged under his. Transfers made to external accounts, but with my digital signature forged, my credentials used when I had provably been elsewhere. Documents approved in my name, but that I had never seen, let alone authorized. Every click I made revealed another layer of lies, another piece of evidence of fraud. It was all a farce, an elaborate, carefully constructed fraud that had probably been in the works for months, maybe years, and he had used my access, my trust, my naivety, my dedication, and late hours when I was the only one in the office, to protect himself. He had embezzled company resources, manipulated data, created false documents, rerouted payments, built an entire architecture of fraud, and when the audit inevitably started investigating, he already had the perfect scapegoat ready and waiting. Me. My whole body trembled when I understood the full dimension of what he had done. Not from fear this time, from anger, from that anger that makes you see everything with frightening, crystalline clarity. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't made a mistake. I had been the victim of a systematic, calculated scheme, of a setup, of a man who had no scruples whatsoever, who didn't care about destroying another person's life, another person's career, another person's reputation and mental health, as long as he came out unscathed, as long as he got the damn promotion he wanted so badly. He had systematically set me up over the course of months, maybe even years, using my credentials to authorize his fraudulent activities, building a paper trail that pointed directly at me while he remained clean, untouchable, innocent. The more I dug, the more I found. He had been doing this for a long time, perhaps since I first started working under him. Small amounts at first, probably testing to see if anyone would notice, if the systems would catch it. When nobody did, the amounts grew larger. He had created fake vendor accounts, approved fictitious invoices for services never rendered, rerouted payments into accounts he controlled, and every single transaction bore my digital signature, my login credentials, my authorization. He had been brilliant in his deception, I had to admit with a sick kind of respect. He had used times when I was logged in but away from my desk, during meetings, during lunch breaks, during those rare moments when I went to the bathroom or stepped out for a coffee. He must have watched my patterns carefully, learned my habits, my routines, my schedule, found the perfect windows of opportunity to commit his crimes under my name. He probably had software that kept my session active even when I locked my computer, or had somehow gained access to my passwords. The level of planning was sophisticated, almost impressive in its thoroughness. Little did I know that this discovery would be the beginning of my strength, the spark that would ignite everything that followed. I printed everything, using the office printer late at night when nobody was around. I saved it on 3 different flash drives that I kept in separate locations, one in my apartment, one in my parents' house when I visited, one in a bank safety deposit box. I took screenshots of every conversation, every email, every system change record, every access log, every approval, every transaction. I organized everything in folders, chronologically, with my own notes explaining each piece of evidence in clear, simple language that anyone could understand. I created spreadsheets correlating the fraudulent activities with my known whereabouts, proving I couldn't have been the one to authorize them. I requested and obtained my building access records from my apartment complex, showing when I had entered and left. I pulled my credit card statements showing purchases I had made at times that coincided with some of the fraudulent authorizations, proving I was physically elsewhere. I gathered evidence of his access to my workstation, including security camera footage requests that would show him at my desk when I wasn't there. I wanted to make it impossible to ignore, impossible to deny, impossible to dismiss as the desperate accusations of a disgruntled employee. I built a case that would have made a prosecutor proud, documenting everything with meticulous care, anticipating every possible counter-argument, closing every possible loophole. This was my training and my nature working in my favor. The same attention to detail and thoroughness that had made me good at my job now made me a formidable investigator. And then, at dawn, when the city was sleeping, and I could barely breathe properly from so much anxiety, so much fear, but also so much determination and righteous anger, I wrote an email, an anonymous email, directly to the company's internal audit department. I knew I had to be careful, strategic. If I revealed my identity, Jae-hyun might find a way to discredit me before the investigation even began. He had already proven he was willing to destroy me to protect himself. What would stop him from going further? What would stop him from claiming I was mentally unstable, or vindictive, or trying to cover my own crimes by accusing him? The subject was simple, direct, impossible to ignore. Irregularities in Project Phoenix, evidence attached. In the body of the email, I was objective, clinical, professional. I didn't put emotion. I didn't put anger or accusations or drama. Just the facts, laid out clearly and undeniably. Serious irregularities have been identified involving manager Jae-hyun Kim. Evidence includes embezzlement of company resources, systematic data manipulation, forgery of digital signatures, and creation of fraudulent vendor accounts. All supporting documentation is attached to this email. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of fraudulent activity spanning multiple years. I request an urgent and confidential investigation. The integrity of the company and the justice owed to wrongly accused employees depend on prompt action. I attached everything, every document, every proof, every trace he had left, thinking nobody would look, thinking he was too smart, too careful, too untouchable. I included a detailed analysis showing the patterns, the timeline, the discrepancies between the official records and the reality. I provided a roadmap for the investigation, essentially doing half of their work for them, making it easy for them to verify my claims. I wanted to leave them no excuse for inaction. And then I pressed send. My finger trembled over the mouse. For a second, for a long, agonizing moment, I thought about going back. What if this goes wrong? What if nobody believes it? What if he finds out it was me? What if he destroys me for good, makes it impossible for me to ever work in this industry again? What if they think I'm just a disgruntled employee trying to get revenge? What if they see this as petty retaliation rather than legitimate whistleblowing? What if the audit department is corrupt too, or incompetent, or simply doesn't care enough to investigate properly? But then I remembered his smile in that meeting room, the coldness in his eyes, the way he looked at me as if I were nothing, less than nothing, an inconvenience to be eliminated, the way he said so coldly, so casually, that I was just an employee, that I was disposable, that nobody would believe me if I tried to fight back, and I clicked. There was no turning back. The email disappeared from my outbox, carrying with it my last hope for justice, for vindication, for proof that I wasn't the failure everyone now believed me to be. I sat there in the darkness of my apartment, the city lights from my window casting strange shadows on the walls, and I cried. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of having finally done something, of having fought back instead of just accepting my fate. Whatever happened next, at least I had tried. In the following days, I continued going to work. I continued sitting at that dark desk in the corner of the office. I continued being invisible, completing the mundane tasks they had assigned to me, showing up and doing my job as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was different. I wasn't broken anymore. I was waiting, watching, observing everything with new eyes, noting patterns and behaviors I had never noticed before. And with each day that passed without any response, without any sign that my email had been received or acted upon, I began to doubt. The confidence I had felt when I pressed send began to erode, replaced by creeping fear and uncertainty. What if they didn't believe it? What if they simply ignored it, filed it away, decided it was too much trouble to investigate? What if I did all this for nothing? What if the audit department was in Jae-hyun's pocket too, or intimidated by his connections, or simply didn't care enough to challenge a rising star in the company? In a company this size, with politics this complex, anything was possible. Maybe they would see the evidence and decide it was easier to maintain the status quo than to deal with the scandal of a manager committing fraud. Maybe they would quietly reprimand him and cover it up to avoid damaging the company's reputation with clients and investors. Maybe my carefully documented case would simply disappear into a bureaucratic black hole, never to be seen or mentioned again. I tried to read the office dynamics for any sign that something was happening, any indication that an investigation had begun. I watched Jae-hyun carefully, looking for any sign that he knew he was being investigated, any crack in his confident facade. But he seemed completely normal, completely unconcerned. He came in every morning with his expensive coffee from the cafe downstairs, his designer suit perfectly pressed, his confident stride unchanged. He laughed and joked with senior management, He took long lunches at expensive restaurants, often not returning until late afternoon. He left early on Fridays. If there was an investigation happening, he showed no awareness of it whatsoever, and that made me doubt even more. Had my email just disappeared into a void? Had anyone even read it? Or had it been automatically filtered into some spam folder? Another anonymous complaint from another disgruntled employee. Was I fooling myself to think that one email, even one with extensive documentation, could actually change anything in this massive corporation? But then, 3 weeks later, everything changed. It was subtle at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but I was paying attention. I was watching everything now. The air in the office felt different, heavier somehow. The doors of the boardroom were closed more often than usual, and when they opened, serious-faced people in suits that I didn't recognize would emerge, carrying folders and speaking in low tones. Managers walked hurriedly through the hallways, with tense expressions, worried glances. Meetings were canceled without explanation, rescheduled, then canceled again. People were called to give statements to individuals from departments they'd never dealt with before. Finance people who normally never left their floor, legal advisors, external consultants, and Jae-hyun, the man who was always everywhere at once, who always made a point of being seen, being noticed, whose loud laugh and confident presence dominated every space he entered, had suddenly become scarce. At first, I thought maybe he was just busy, or traveling for business, but then I realized he hadn't been in any meetings for days. His office door remained closed. His name stopped appearing on email threads. It was as if he was slowly disappearing, fading from visibility. The whispers began. They started quietly, in corners and closed offices, but gradually spread through the entire floor like a contagion. Audit, investigation, fraud, embezzlement. Words that echoed through the hallways like ghosts, scaring everyone, making the environment tense, heavy with unspoken fear. People spoke in hushed tones, gathered in small groups that would disperse quickly when anyone approached. The usual office banter and casual conversations disappeared, replaced by nervous silence and sidelong glances. I continued working in silence, at my small desk in the corner, away from everything. But inside, my heart was racing, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, waiting, watching, trying not to show anything on my face, trying to stay calm and neutral. But every time someone walked past quickly, every time a door closed with unusual force, every time I heard raised voices from a conference room, I felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with dread. Did they find out? Did my email trigger all of this? Does he know it was me? Does anyone suspect my involvement? I was paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping every time someone approached my desk or said my name. I analyzed every interaction, every glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when I came near, trying to determine if people knew something, if they suspected my role in whatever was unfolding, if they had connected me to the investigation. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks and 2 days after I had sent that anonymous email, it happened. The moment I had been waiting for, hoping for, dreading all at once. An email was sent to the entire company, marked high priority, from the office of the CEO. Subject: official communication from the board of directors. My heart almost stopped when I saw the notification appear on my screen. My hands shook so badly I could barely click to open it. The email was formal, cold, corporate in its language, carefully crafted by lawyers to say what needed to be said while protecting the company from liability. But despite the careful wording, the content was explosive, devastating, vindicating. After an extensive internal investigation conducted by the audit department in cooperation with external forensic accountants and legal advisors, we have identified serious irregularities involving the project manager, Mr. Jae-hyun Kim. Evidence has confirmed instances of fraud, systematic data manipulation, embezzlement of company resources, and misuse of third-party credentials to facilitate and conceal fraudulent activities. These activities represent serious breaches of company policy, professional ethics, and potentially criminal law. Mr. Kim has been terminated from the company with immediate effect. We sincerely apologize to the affected employees, particularly those who were wrongly implicated in these activities. We recognize that our initial response was inadequate, and that innocent employees suffered unjust consequences. We are taking immediate steps to correct these injustices and to ensure nothing like this happens again. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement authorities who may pursue criminal charges. We have implemented additional security measures, revised our oversight protocols, and strengthened our whistleblower protections to prevent such incidents in the future. I read it 3 times, 4, 5, 6. Each time I had to blink away tears that kept blurring the words. I couldn't believe it. After weeks of doubt and fear, after almost giving up hope, after lying awake night after night wondering if I had done the right thing, here was the proof. He had fallen. The investigation had confirmed everything. The truth had come out. And the mention of third-party credentials and employees who were wrongly implicated, that was me. They had discovered he used my name, that I was the victim, not the culprit, that everything they had accused me of, everything I had been blamed for, demoted for, humiliated for, had actually been his crimes, not mine. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight, my throat constricted. I put my hand over my heart, trying to calm its frantic beating, trying to control my breathing before I hyperventilated right there at my desk. Tears began to fall despite my efforts to hold them back, but this time, they weren't from sadness or shame or despair. They were from relief, from validation, from justice, from a feeling that finally, after everything, someone had believed me. Finally, the truth had come out. Finally, after weeks of doubt and fear and wondering if I had done the right thing, I had confirmation that justice was possible, that truth could prevail, that one person standing up for what was right could make a difference. The office erupted in controlled chaos. It was like watching a dam break. All the tension and fear and speculation of the past weeks suddenly bursting forth. People clustered in small groups everywhere, by the coffee machine, in hallways, in empty offices, talking in hushed but excited tones. Nobody could believe it. Jae-hyun Kim, the golden boy, the rising star, the manager everyone thought was destined for the executive suite, was being escorted out in disgrace. Phones were buzzing constantly as people texted friends in other departments, other companies, spreading the news like wildfire. Within hours, it would be all over the industry. This was the kind of scandal that would dominate professional gossip for months, maybe years. A cautionary tale about corruption and abuse of power. I sat at my desk, watching it all unfold around me, feeling strangely detached, as if I were watching a movie rather than experiencing real life, as if this were happening to someone else. That afternoon, I saw him for the last time. I had gone down to the lobby to get some air, to escape the chaos and speculation upstairs, to try to process everything that was happening, and that's when I saw him being escorted out. He was leaving the building, flanked by security guards, without his impeccable suit. Instead, he wore a simple jacket that looked wrong on him, too casual, too ordinary. Without his badge around his neck, that symbol of access and authority now stripped away. Without his leather briefcase, without any of the props and signifiers of his former power. His face was pale, drawn, aged somehow, as if he had lost years in just a few weeks. The confident swagger was completely gone, replaced by a hunched, defeated posture, shoulders curved inward, head down. When he passed me in the lobby, perhaps by chance, or perhaps because he was looking around desperately for any friendly face, any sign of support, our eyes met, and for the first time, the very first time in all the years I had known him, he looked at me with fear, real, genuine fear. It was no longer that superior, arrogant look of someone who thought himself untouchable. It was no longer the cold, calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. It was the look of someone who had been discovered, exposed, defeated, of someone who had lost everything, his job, his reputation, his future, possibly his freedom if criminal charges followed, of someone who finally understood, too late, that he had underestimated the wrong person. I saw the realization cross his face, saw the moment when he understood. He understood that I wasn't disposable, that I had been smarter than he thought, stronger than he imagined, more persistent and thorough and determined than he had ever given me credit for, and that he, with all his arrogance, with all his power and connections and manipulations, had been defeated by someone he had considered insignificant. The disposable employee had destroyed him. The scapegoat had become his downfall. The victim had won. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? What excuse could he offer? What justification could he provide for what he had done, for the lives he had damaged? for the trust he had betrayed. The security guards urged him forward, and he stumbled slightly, regaining his balance and continuing toward the door without looking back. I didn't smile. I didn't feel pleasure or satisfaction or triumph. I didn't want to gloat or celebrate his suffering. I just felt relief, profound and overwhelming, as if a giant weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I had been carrying for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight, as if I could finally breathe again, really breathe, filling my lungs completely for the first time in months, as if, for the first time in so long, I was myself again, not the diminished, doubtful, fearful version I had become, but the person I had been before, the person I was meant to be. In the following days and weeks, the entire company was in shock, struggling to process what had happened and what it meant for all of us. People whispered in the hallways, in bathrooms, in the cafeteria, trying to piece together the full story, trying to understand how someone like Jae-hyun, who had seemed so competent, so reliable, so destined for greatness, had managed to fool everyone for so long. How much money had he actually stolen? The rumors varied wildly. Some said hundreds of thousands, others claimed millions. How many people had he used and manipulated? How many careers had he damaged or destroyed to advance his own? How had nobody in management noticed before? Why had the systems and oversight that were supposed to prevent this kind of fraud failed so completely? The questions multiplied with each passing day. Some colleagues came to me, timid and embarrassed, to apologize. They approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact at first. They said they had believed him, that they had judged me without knowing the truth, that they were sorry for their silence when I was being scapegoated. Some of their apologies seemed genuine, motivated by real remorse. Others felt perfunctory, motivated more by fear that their own complicity might be noticed and held against them. I accepted the apologies with as much grace as I could manage, but I didn't forget. I couldn't forget, because I had learned a crucial lesson that in moments of crisis, in situations where standing up requires courage and risk, you discover who is really on your side. And most people weren't. Most people had been content to look away, to protect themselves, to let an innocent person be destroyed, rather than risk their own positions by speaking up. That knowledge changed how I saw my colleagues, how I saw the office dynamics, how I understood the true nature of corporate loyalty. A week after the email announcement, I was called to a meeting with the board of directors. The summons came via email from the CEO's executive assistant, formal and polite, but leaving no room for refusal. My heart was beating hard, anxiety spiking, as I rode the elevator up to the executive floor, a floor I had only been to once or twice before, a floor that represented the highest echelons of company power. When I entered the conference room, I was struck by how different it was from the rest of the office. Where our floor was all glass and open plan, this room was traditional corporate luxury, dark wood paneling, expensive artwork, a massive table that probably cost more than my annual salary, leather chairs that looked like they belonged in a gentleman's club. The director sat at the head of the table, a man in his 60s, with gray hair and glasses and a gray suit that probably cost thousands. He looked serious, but not hostile. There were others there too. The CFO, a stern woman in her 50s, the head of HR, looking uncomfortable, and 2 lawyers, one internal and one external. "Please sit down," the director said, gesturing to a chair. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "We would like to formally apologize for what happened to you. You were the victim of a terrible situation, a systematic fraud that our oversight failed to detect. We, as a company, failed to protect you. We should have noticed the irregularities sooner. We should have questioned why someone with your track record, your documented reliability and attention to detail, would suddenly become careless. We failed to investigate properly when the accusations were first made. We failed you, and for that, we are truly sorry." He paused, letting his words sink in, watching my face for reaction. I sat frozen, barely breathing, still not quite believing this was happening. "We would like to reinstate you to the main project, with full restoration of your access and responsibilities, and in addition, we are offering substantial compensation for the damages you suffered, both financial compensation for the wages and bonuses you lost during your unjust demotion, and a formal letter clearing your name of any wrongdoing that you can use for future employment references. We're also offering you an immediate promotion to senior project manager and a significant raise, effective immediately. We recognize that you showed exceptional integrity in this situation, both in your work before the fraud was discovered and in your courage in reporting it. That kind of integrity is exactly what we want to encourage and reward in this company." I was silent for a moment, processing his words, trying to understand what this meant for my future. Part of me, the angry part that had been nursing resentment and hurt for weeks, wanted to scream, wanted to say that an apology and a promotion didn't undo the damage, didn't erase the humiliation I had endured, the nights I couldn't sleep, the self-doubt that had nearly destroyed me. Wanted to tell them that they had abandoned me, that nobody had defended me, that I had to fight alone while they all stood by and watched. Another part of me wanted to walk out, to find a new job at a company that wouldn't treat me as disposable, that wouldn't throw me under the bus at the first sign of trouble, to start fresh somewhere else, without the memories and associations that this place would always carry. But another part of me, the practical part that recognized the reality of needing employment and the value of this vindication, simply nodded. This was an opportunity, not just for career advancement, but for something more important, to show everyone, including myself, that I could come back from this, that I could reclaim my place, that I was not, and never had been, disposable. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I accept, because I knew that was the best decision for me at that moment. I needed that job, needed the financial stability. I needed to rebuild my life and my confidence. And above all, I wanted to prove to myself that I was capable of coming back stronger, that I could walk back into that office with my head held high, not as a victim or a supplicant, but as a survivor who had fought for justice and won." In the following months, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. Nobody talked about the case anymore, at least not openly. It became one of those things that everyone knew about but nobody mentioned, like a family secret. The company wanted to move past the scandal, to rebuild its reputation, to assure clients that it was a trustworthy partner with strong ethical standards and robust oversight. Press releases were issued, new policies were announced, training sessions on ethics and fraud detection were mandated for all employees. I was reinstated to the project I had been working on before the disaster. My name appeared in reports and emails again. I participated in meetings again, my contributions acknowledged and valued, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, my desk moved back toward the windows, back toward the light, and the view of Seoul spread out below. But the biggest change, the most important transformation, wasn't physical, it was internal. I was no longer that girl who arrived early to please others, who stayed late to prove her worth, who accepted being diminished just to not cause problems, who swallowed words and suppressed opinions to not be seen as difficult or uncooperative. That version of me was gone, burned away in the fire of what I had endured. Now, when someone tries to belittle me, I take a deep breath and remember, I survived someone who tried to destroy me, and I won. When someone tries to interrupt me in a meeting, I don't lower my head or trail off into silence. I keep talking. I speak louder if I need to. I make eye contact and refuse to be silenced. When someone tries to blame me for something I didn't do, I don't accept it quietly. I defend my truth. I provide evidence. I stand my ground. I document everything and demand accountability, because I learned that silence is not peace. Silence is not harmony or being a team player. Silence is just a way of dying slowly, of letting yourself be erased piece by piece. Silence is complicity in your own oppression. I also learned not to trust blindly, to always verify and document. I learned to keep evidence, to protect myself, not because I live in fear or because I'm paranoid, but because I know now that the corporate world can be cruel and unjust, that there are people who will use you and throw you away without thinking twice, that the systems designed to protect employees often fail, and that sometimes you have to protect yourself. And I never want to be unprepared or vulnerable like that again. I keep detailed records now, copies of important emails, notes from significant meetings, documentation of every major decision and who made it. It's not paranoia. It's prudence. It's self-protection. It's learning from experience. But above all, I learned something profound about myself, something that changed how I see myself and my place in the world. I learned that I am stronger than I ever imagined, that I can fall, can be trampled, can be humiliated and dismissed and treated as worthless, but I will always get up. I will always find a way to fight back, because I am not disposable. I never was. I was just surrounded by people who didn't know how to value me, who couldn't see what I was worth. And when you move away from those who diminish you, when you remove yourself from their distorting influence, you can finally see your own size, and you realize you were always a giant. You were always capable, always strong, always worthy. The problem was never you. It was them, their insecurity, their need to feel superior by making others feel inferior, their willingness to sacrifice others for their own advancement, their fundamental lack of integrity and courage. Today, every time I look through the window on the 15th floor and see the reflection of the city in the glass panes, I smile, because I learned that those who try to erase us, who try to make us small and invisible, are always the ones afraid of being forgotten themselves. Jae-hyun tried to erase me because he knew, deep down, that I was capable, that I was competent, that I was a threat to his carefully constructed facade, and he was right to be afraid. I was all those things. I am all those things. I am more than capable. I am resilient. I am strong. I am irreplaceable. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the office after everyone else has left, when the sun is setting and the city lights are beginning to turn on, I look at that meeting room where he told me I was disposable. The room looks different now, smaller somehow, less intimidating, and I remember how I felt that day. Small, invisible, useless, worthless. The crushing weight of his words, the fear that maybe he was right. But now, when I look at that room, I see something else entirely. I see the place where I decided, even if I didn't fully realize it at the time, that I would never let anyone make me feel that way again. The place where, unknowingly, I began my own silent revolution. The place where I stopped being a victim and started being a fighter. The place where my true strength was born from the ashes of my humiliation. There are days when I still feel angry. The rage hasn't completely disappeared, and maybe it never will. Angry for having wasted so much time trying to please someone who never respected me, who saw me only as a tool to be used. Angry for having doubted myself, for having internalized his criticisms, for having believed even for a moment that I was the problem. Angry for having believed I needed his approval to have value, that my worth came from external validation rather than from within. Angry for all the nights I didn't sleep, all the meals I skipped, all the moments with friends and family I missed because I was working myself to death for someone who didn't care if I lived or died, as long as I was useful. But this anger, instead of destroying me or consuming me with bitterness, strengthens me. It reminds me of what I never want to be again, what I never want to accept again. It fuels my determination to create better workplaces, to stand up for others who are being mistreated, to be the ally I wished I had had when I was going through this nightmare. It motivates me to speak up when I see injustice, to use my position now to protect those who are vulnerable, to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to others. And there are days when I feel at peace, a deep, genuine, profound peace that I never knew before. Because I know that in the end, justice was served. Not out of revenge. I never wanted revenge, never wanted to hurt him for the sake of hurting him, but out of truth. Truth demanded justice. And truth always finds a way to appear, even when everyone tries to hide it, even when it seems nobody is paying attention, even when it takes time and patience and courage and sacrifice. Light breaks through darkness eventually. Justice, though sometimes delayed, though sometimes requiring great effort to achieve, ultimately arrives. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, as someone once said, and I witnessed that truth firsthand. Today I understand that being called disposable was, paradoxically, the greatest gift he could have given me, though he certainly didn't intend it as such, because that word, that cruel dismissal, became my catalyst. It was what woke me up from my complacency, from my acceptance of mistreatment, from my belief that this was just how things were and had to be. It made me question everything I had accepted as normal. It made me stop accepting crumbs and start demanding what I always deserved. Respect, recognition, fairness, justice. That insult, disposable, was meant to destroy me, to keep me down, to ensure I never challenged him or threatened his position. Instead, it transformed me. It forged me into something stronger. The weapon meant to break me, instead, became the forge in which I was retempered, emerging harder and more resilient than before. I also understood that I didn't need his downfall to feel victorious. My victory wasn't really in seeing him being escorted out of the building by security guards, though I won't lie and say there wasn't some satisfaction in that moment. My true victory was in having found my own voice when I had been silent for so long, in having trusted myself when nobody else trusted me, when even I had begun to doubt myself, in having fought for my truth even when everything seemed lost, even when it seemed easier to just give up and accept defeat, in having the courage to expose wrongdoing even when I was terrified of the consequences, even when I didn't know if anyone would believe me or take action. That's real strength. That's real victory. Not in someone else's fall, but in your own rise. And most importantly, the most profound realization. I understood that my value never depended on what he thought of me. It never depended on how many hours I worked, how many reports I generated, how many sacrifices I made, how many times I said yes when every fiber of my being wanted to say no. My value was always intrinsic, always in me, always part of who I fundamentally am. It was always in my integrity, my dedication, my ability to get up after every fall. And nobody can take that away from me. Nobody. Not him, not any future boss, not any colleague or competitor or critic. My worth is mine. It doesn't come from external validation. I don't need anyone's permission or approval to know I am valuable. I know it myself, deep in my core, unshakable now. Today, when someone asks me what I learned from all this, I answer with confidence born of experience. I learned that you are never truly alone when you are on the side of truth. There's a strength that comes from knowing you're right, from standing up for what's just and ethical. I learned that justice takes time, sometimes agonizingly long, but it comes if you persist, if you don't give up, if you keep pushing. I learned that being underestimated is an opportunity to prove them wrong, to exceed their limited expectations, to show them exactly how badly they misjudged you. And above all, I learned that the only approval I really need is my own. I learned that speaking up, even when your voice shakes with fear, is always better than staying silent and being complicit in injustice. I learned that one person with courage and evidence and determination can make a difference, can challenge systems, can change outcomes. I learned that institutional systems, however corrupt or inefficient they may sometimes seem, can still work if someone is willing to activate them, to push them into action. So if you're going through something similar right now, if you're being diminished, humiliated, used, scapegoated, manipulated, I want you to know something vitally important. You are not disposable. You never were. That's a lie they tell you to keep you compliant, to keep you from recognizing your own power and worth. The people who make you feel disposable are the ones who fear your potential. They are the ones who know, whether consciously or unconsciously, that you are capable of much more than they are. And that's precisely why they try to keep you small, try to diminish you, try to convince you that you're nothing without them. Because if you discover your true size, if you realize your actual worth and capabilities, they lose control over you. Your brilliance threatens their mediocrity. Your competence exposes their inadequacy. Your integrity challenges their corruption. Document everything, every meeting, every decision, every instruction, every email, every conversation. Trust your instinct when something feels wrong. Your instincts are usually right, even when you doubt them. Fight for your truth with every tool available to you. And above all, never, never doubt your fundamental value and worth. You are irreplaceable, unique, valuable beyond measure. You just need to be in the right place, surrounded by the right people, in an environment that recognizes and nurtures what you have to offer, for that to become evident to everyone. And if the place where you are doesn't value you, if the people around you don't see what you're worth, then you're not the problem. They are. The place is. The system is. And sometimes the most important, most courageous decision you can make is to recognize that you deserve better and to take whatever action is necessary to achieve it. And remember, carry this with you always. The greatest proof of love is when you decide to love yourself enough to not accept less than you deserve. When you decide, firmly and finally, that you won't swallow insults anymore, won't accept crumbs when you deserve the whole feast, won't make yourself small anymore to fit in spaces that weren't made for you. When you decide that you deserve respect, dignity, recognition, fair treatment, and justice. And when you make that decision, when you truly commit to it, everything changes. Because you change. You stop accepting unacceptable treatment. You start demanding what you're owed. You stop apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for asserting boundaries. You start claiming the space and respect and recognition you deserve. If this story touched you in any way, if it resonated with your own experiences, or gave you hope or inspiration, leave a heart in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear this message, because I know I'm not alone in this experience. I know there are thousands, maybe millions of people going through what I went through, enduring similar mistreatment and manipulation right now, and I want all of them to know, I need them to understand, you will get through this, you will survive, you will stand up from this, and you will be stronger than ever before. Your story doesn't end with someone else's cruelty or injustice. Your story doesn't end with being discarded or diminished. It begins, it truly begins, when you decide to write your own ending, when you take control of the narrative, when you refuse to let others define who you are and what you're worth. In Korea, in Seoul, in that glass building on the 15th floor, I learned that even the tallest, most impressive glass buildings hide cracks and flaws and corruption beneath their shining surfaces. But I also learned something more hopeful, more beautiful: the sun. The sun always finds a way to break through, to penetrate even the darkest spaces, to illuminate what was hidden. And you, reading this, hearing this, you are the sun in your own story. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't let anyone dim your light or make you believe you're less bright than you are. Your light is yours alone, intrinsic and inalienable. Nobody gave it to you, and therefore nobody can take it away, no matter how hard they try. Shine bright, shine boldly, shine without apology or hesitation, because the world needs your light, most especially when, someone tries to extinguish it. When they try to dim you, shine brighter. When they try to silence you, speak louder. When they try to erase you, make yourself impossible to ignore. You are not disposable. You are irreplaceable. And you are so much stronger than you know.